I thought I was alone in the abandoned fire lookout until I heard someone climbing the ladder behind me. What I saw next, I still can't explain. Back in 2015, I set out on a road trip to a forest located a few hours from home. My goal was to hike up to an old, abandoned fire lookout that I'd been dying to check out. I should probably point out, it was technically off limits. Entering or camping there wasn't allowed, since the structure hadn't been maintained and could be unsafe. Still, I'd read up on it beforehand. Most of the posts I found online said it seemed stable enough. The only catch? The most recent post I could dig up was from 3 years earlier. So, I really had no idea what condition it would be in when I got there. I eventually spotted a small ditch off the side of the road that worked well enough for parking. After that, I grabbed my backpack, packed with gear for 2 days, and began the trek. Trips like this don't usually offer any marked trails, so I relied on a handheld satellite GPS to make sure I stayed on course. But in reality, I was just pushing through untouched woodland, navigating unfamiliar terrain. The hike from where I parked took about 4 to 5 hours. The further in I got, the more dense and rough the terrain got. I was really banking on the fire lookout to still be intact and good enough for me to camp out in. But I guess if not, then I was just going to have to find somewhere else nearby to set up my tent and sleep at. After the pretty tiring several hours of hiking through the woods, I finally got there. I could see the building peeking out above the trees, and when I got closer, it actually looked decently in shape. The paint was worn off, of course, but it seemed to be holding up well. I gave the support beams a few pushes, and they were really solid, so I tried my luck climbing up the ladder. It was metal and felt sturdy, but still creaked with every step up. When I got to the top, I was in awe for a moment at the views. I could see basically the entire forest. There were no buildings or roads or houses for miles in all directions. It was just the woods. After taking in the view, I went around the ledge and inside the lookouts. It was really small, not like one of those big ones that you see get turned into Airbnbs or whatever. This was just one room, maybe 150 square feet. It had a decaying bed in the corner and an old wooden desk in the other corner with rotting windows spanning the entire wall. There wasn't too much else to look at in there, so I put my bag down and rolled out my mattress and sleeping bag, then heated up a meal on my mini camping stove. Once the sun was setting, I walked out to the ledge and watched it. It was by far one of the best views I'd ever seen. I felt like it went by quick though, and then it was just darkness. It was cloudy out too, so no moonlight or stars were lighting up the sky. With nothing else to do though, I stayed sitting out on the ledge for a while. It was probably an hour into the night when I saw something below me. There was a light moving around in the trees. What was strange about it though was it wasn't like an artificial light. It had this orangish hue and was kind of flickering, kind of like a campfire would, which led me to believe it was a torch. It was moving between the trees in the forest, not too far from where I was. The chances of someone else being out here at the same time as me in such a remote part of the woods were really slim, given there wasn't even a trail to get here. Also, traveling around at night without a normal flashlight and using a torch was pretty odd. I watched as the light moved under the trees for a while. Then it went behind something where I could no longer see it. For the next 30 minutes, I never saw it appear again. I still stayed out on the ledge, though, taking in the calmness and quietness of the night. Eventually, the wind started to make it a bit cold, so I stood up to take in one last view before heading inside. When I looked below the ledge, though, someone was there. They were standing at the bottom in the grassy area between the fire lookout and the woods. It looked like they were looking directly up at me. Maybe it was the person with the light I saw earlier. "Hello," I called out. I didn't know what else to say. They didn't move or say anything back to me. It was just this strange 10 or 15 seconds of looking at each other before they lifted up their hand, like in an acknowledging way or apologizing. Then they turned around and walked into the woods, still with no light on. Obviously, that was incredibly creepy and eerie, but for some reason, in the moment, I felt so sure that it was just another hiker wanting to stay in the lookouts. It was probably just looking up, trying to see if anyone was inside already. Why he hesitated to respond and only lifted his hand up, I don't know. I stayed outside for a little longer, but not seeing anything else. I went inside and got my sleeping bag to warm up. It was a little bit hard to fall asleep because of the wind, hitting the windows and the wooden beams creaking under me. But eventually I did manage to pass out. It's hard to really know how much time passed, but when I woke up, the wind had settled down and it was still very dark outside. I opened my eyes, wondering why I was suddenly awake. But then I heard a familiar sound, the soft metal creak of the ladder outside. I sat up, thinking I must be mistaken. But then I heard it again and again. Someone was climbing up the ladder. I couldn't tell how far up or down they were. I could just hear the hinges at the top of the ladder creak with every step up they took. Outside the windows, though, it was completely dark. I unzipped my sleeping bag and got up, heart racing as I grabbed my backpack and walked onto the ledge. During the 20 or so seconds that it took to get up, the creaking got louder and faster, like they were hurrying before it suddenly stopped, just as I made it out to the ledge. I stood frozen for a moment, listening, waiting for any other noise. Then, cautiously, I stepped along the walkway and peeked around the corner toward the ladder entrance. No one. I edged closer, my pulse pounding, and leaned over to glance down the shaft. The ladder was empty. For a second, I just stood there, stunned, my mind racing with fear and confusion, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. Suddenly, a burst of footsteps thundered across the wooden walkway behind me. I spun just in time to catch a fleeting glimpse of a dark figure darting past the windows across from me. Without thinking, I dropped onto the ladder and began climbing down as fast as I could. My hands trembled. The cold metal rungs were slick, and every nerve in my body was screaming as I descended with someone right above me. I was only halfway down when I looked up and saw a head lean over the edge. I didn't stop until my feet hit the forest floor. To this day, I don't know why I brought my backpack with me when I'd gone up to investigate, but thank God I did. It might have been what saved me. With my flashlight and GPS still inside, I was able to navigate through the dark woods and make it back to my car. As far as I know, no one followed me. I drove away without a second glance, and I've never gone back. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, I was spending the weekend camping at a small, quiet lake. Honestly, it wasn't meant to be anything out of the ordinary. Just a simple escape into the woods for a couple of days to unwind by the water. The first day went exactly as planned. I arrived, set up my campsite, and spent the day and night just relaxing. This place was pretty remote. There was a narrow footpath leading in, but it wasn't listed on any online maps, so chances are only a handful of locals even knew it existed. My dad used to bring me here when I was a kid, and in all those years, both when I was young and the times I'd come alone as an adult, I never once ran into another person out here. Not even signs that someone else had ever visited. On the second day, I spent most of my time walking the shoreline, just thinking. I must have made 3, maybe 4 full loops around the lake. And during all that time, everything stayed calm, peaceful, quiet in the best possible way. But then, on one of my laps around the lake, I happened to spot some footprints in the dirt just on the edge of the tree line. I had been walking the same circle over and over and never saw them before. Where they were, it was so clear and obvious, I don't think I would have missed them. They also looked pretty new. And what was really strange was not only that the footprints meant somebody else was out here, but that they were literal footprints, like barefoot, not shoe prints. The part of the lake I was at didn't even have any easy access to the water, so it's not like they took their boots off before going for a swim. Not to mention, I would have seen them in the lake. Seeing this really creeped me out for some reason. Why didn't I see them nearby while I was walking around? Were they watching me and didn't want me to see them? It was hard not to get paranoid about it. From what I was able to see, it looked like the footprints went up to the tree line, looking out at the lake, then right back into the woods, where it seemed to go straight back for a while. I didn't want to follow them into that unknown territory of the forest, so I just walked back to my campsite. I kept looking out to the lake, or I guess the tree line around the lake, seeing if anyone was out there. I never saw anyone. As the sun started to come down, the paranoia started to build up again. Something about the footprints just felt off, and knowing that they were likely still nearby, it wasn't a comforting feeling. When it got darker, I fueled up my campfire with a good supply of wood and sat around it. I did whatever I could to keep my mind off of it, but it was pretty difficult. Part of me felt justified in feeling uneasy, and another part of me felt like I was overreacting for no reason. But not too far into the night, I heard footsteps approaching from the trees. I instantly turned and faced the darkness they were coming from. There were more than one. It sounded like 2 people slowly walking closer to my campsite. I stared in their direction until they suddenly came into the light. It was a man and a woman walking next to each other and stopping just at the edge of where the light from the fire could reach. I couldn't see much of their faces were really anything more than their basic shape. I couldn't even tell how old or young they were. "Can I help you?" As soon as I said that, the woman turned and sprinted back into the woods, completely disappearing. But the man stayed where he was. He didn't move or even look back at the woman. It was about then that I looked down and realized he wasn't wearing any shoes. These were definitely the ones who were out by the lake. I asked again if I could help him, but then he too turned around and quietly walked back into the woods. I pretty much had an internal freak out after that. That was the most unsettling and strange encounter I'd ever had, almost not even feeling real. I didn't want to be in those woods for another second. I immediately started to pack my things. I'm not the kind of person to stick around when things get sketchy. Thankfully, my setup was easy to put up and take down. So I had everything tied down in my bag and ready to go within a few minutes. I didn't know where they went, but I didn't want to still be here if they came back. I kicked out all the unlit logs from the fire so it would burn out soon after I left. Then I hurried into the woods. The walk was nearly 2 hours. For the first 10 minutes, I was really on edge, unsure if I was being followed, but the further away I got, the better I felt. It was about 40 minutes into the walk. The whole woods was silent, not even any crickets or anything, when I suddenly heard running footsteps nearby. It was in the distance, maybe 100 feet from me, and it was definitely a person. I couldn't see anything though, so I had to just keep walking. Only a few minutes later, I heard it again, this time on the other side of me. The footsteps seemed quieter than they should have been too, which led me to believe that they were running barefoot and that it was the same two I'd seen at the lake. If they'd followed me that deep into the forest, I can't even begin to imagine what their intentions were. For a while, I kept hearing footsteps, quick bursts of running off in the distance. It was like they were shadowing me, creeping silently, then suddenly dashing off again. That walk through the woods was easily the most terrifying experience of my life. Somehow, miraculously, I made it back to my truck. I got out of there. I wish I had more answers. I wish I could tell you who that man and woman were, or what they were doing way out there. But I've got nothing. Sometimes, I question my own sanity. Part of me wonders if they were even real, if they were truly alive. I honestly don't know, and maybe it's better that way. I never went back. I'm a 24-year-old woman from northern Arizona, and this happened a couple of years back. At the time, I was living out of a small camper van, making my way up and down the West Coast. There are all kinds of lifestyles out there. Plenty of people choose to live in vans or RVs like mine. I usually avoided the big cities, preferring to stop in smaller towns when I needed a break between travels. But more often than not, I chose to camp out in the backcountry, far from the crowds and noise. Being in the middle of the woods with nobody else around was where I found myself most comfortable and where I most enjoyed the lifestyle of traveling. I think part of the reason I preferred being alone out in the forest was because, honestly, it always felt safer than stealth camping in a crowded city parking lot. Sure, the woods could get a little eerie at night, but I always felt more at ease knowing no one else was around. That week, I was slowly making my way between two major cities in Washington. I wasn't in a rush, just taking back roads and spending a few days at different campsites along the way. On this particular day, I turned off the main road and followed a narrow dirt trail that led deep into the forest. There were a few pull-off areas here and there, but they were all empty. It seemed like no one had been down that path in quite a while. So I kept going, hoping to find a bigger and maybe more scenic place to set up. Eventually, I reached a wide circular clearing that looked perfect for parking. But it wasn't scenic at all, just surrounded by trees, but it was large and secluded and peaceful, and even had a stone circle in the middle for a campfire. I leveled out my van and parked. Since it was the middle of spring, it was raining pretty much every day. here in Washington, so there wasn't much for me to do outside. I opened the side door to my van for some fresh air while I cooked a meal on my propane stove. It was around sunset, so I still had several hours before I'd be in bed. Over the next 30 minutes, the sun fell past the horizon and the rain started picking up. I shut the door to keep the water out and instead cracked open one of the small windows near the back of the van. I sat on the bed and watched a show on my laptop. But midway through it, a glare came in from the open window behind me. It was a light reflecting onto the screen of my laptop. Before I was able to react, it went away. It didn't move away, though. It turned off as if someone switched the light off. When I turned around and looked out the window, I saw nothing. It was really dark and still pouring down outside. I had no way to know how far the light came from or what it even was. Being on a trail with other pull-off spots, I had to assume it was just another camper. Maybe their headlights that somehow found its way through the trees and shined into my window. Then they quickly turned their vehicle off. The only problem with that was the light didn't come from the road I came down. Behind my window was just trees. Maybe there was another trail nearby that I just hadn't noticed. There wasn't much else I could do to check, so I eventually gave up and went back to my laptop. Every so often, I'd glance out the windows or pause, thinking I heard something outside. But with the rain tapping steadily on the metal roof, it was hard to tell if there were actual sounds out there or just my imagination playing tricks. Each time I looked, I never spotted anything that would confirm someone or something was out there, so I didn't let it bother me too much. Around 10 or maybe 11, I decided to call it a night and try to get some sleep. I shut everything down in the van, closed the windows, and pulled the curtains shut. Inside, it was almost completely dark. I got under the covers and tried to sleep. Usually, I didn't have much trouble at all, but tonight, I just couldn't manage to fall asleep. Unfortunately, the rain picked up even more after an hour, and thunder started rolling in. It was very loud and made it impossible to even try to sleep. About 2 hours into the night, and through all the harsh rain and thunder, I swear I heard something move outside. It was just loud enough for me to know I really heard something. It sounded like someone or something running and kicking over a branch on the ground somewhere just outside of my van. As soon as I heard it, there were no other sounds. It was so dark I couldn't even see the ground beneath the window. The longer I looked out there, the more uneasy I felt. I just had this feeling like someone else was looking back at me. I put the window cover back down. I stayed still, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid, overthinking everything. But not even a minute later, I heard a voice. It was a man's voice, speaking in a hushed but urgent tone, almost like a loud whisper, as if he was talking to someone nearby. I froze, too afraid to pull back the covers or peek through the windows again, certain that if they hadn't seen me already, they would if I moved. Then again, they probably already figured someone was inside the van. And somehow, that made it even more horrifying. There was a good 2 or 3 minutes where I didn't hear anything aside from the rain and thunder before there was suddenly something outside the sliding side door to the van. It sounded like bending plastic, like someone was leaning against the side door. Then there was a knock. A few seconds later, they knocked again. Even though I was sure they knew I was in here already, I still was too scared to speak. Maybe they weren't sure how many people were inside, or if I was a man or a woman, so I felt safer not giving them anything and just staying quiet. A very disturbing and anxious 5 minutes went by, as the knocking continued every few seconds without anyone saying anything. They had to be drenched by now, and probably couldn't see at all through this weather. But then they finally said something. "Sheriff's Department, open up." What? I didn't believe that for a second. If it were true, why wouldn't they have said that from the beginning? They continued knocking and calling out different lines, all basically stating that they were an officer, and I needed to open the door. This seemed like a desperate attempt to get me to open up without violence. I slowly lifted the window cover and looked out. All I could see was a dark figure moving near the door, but from the shape of it, it didn't look like he had any sort of law enforcement gear on. So, I was sure this was about to get really bad. I spent about half a minute going back and forth in my head, unsure of what to do, as the knocking seemed to grow more aggressive and urgent. Eventually, I decided it was worth the risk to jump into the driver's seat and try to get out of there. The second I climbed up front and started the engine, I heard footsteps, 2 sets, rushing toward the van from outside. I was just beginning to pull away when I caught a glimpse of a figure right outside the window beside me. Thankfully, the van didn't get stuck, and I managed to get back onto the dirt trail. As I drove down the road, I never saw a single other vehicle, which only made their presence, and whatever they had planned, feel even more unsettling. I filed a report with the county, who assured me no law enforcement had been in that area that night, but I never heard anything more after that. Things could have ended very differently out there. Luckily, nothing else like that has happened since. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.